Despite their usual shenanigans, the Falcons are off to an impressive 3-2 start, and it's only going to get better from here.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. And all you have to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. In today's episode, I am joined by none other than Dave Choate, the Falcoholic himself, and he will be giving us his lowdown on the Falcons' 3-2 start, sort of what their offensive identity and sort of the defense's sort of late game magic and whether or not, you know, that is something that will continue or whatever. So we'll get into all of that on today's episode. Unfortunately, we will not be talking about Andrew Stueber leaving the Atlanta Falcons to go to the Cincinnati Bengals like we talked about Zion Lowe going to the Buffalo Bills. But hey, you know, if you care about that stuff, hey, people are poaching, you know, practice squad players. So that tells you something about the roster that the Falcons have. But let's start off with the Falcons being off to that 3-2 start with that illustrious roster, currently in first place in the NFC South, beating the Bucs in October for the second year in a row. You know, the third year in a row where they were able to, in the previous year in 2022, they beat Carolina in October, got in first place, couldn't sustain that success. So I say that, Dave, we've been here before. Why, if at all, do you think it is different this time?
Basically, what I'm looking at is the way that they've won, which is not that unfamiliar. It's, you know, last-second shenanigans, overcoming a lot of mistakes. But the sustainability of it seems a little bit better. You actually have a quarterback who is sort of rounding into shape and seems capable of presiding over a quality passing attack. It's not sort of, you know, the Mariota times when things were going downhill. We could already see that in October, or Ritter, where we were riding the Ritter coaster at this point. It was not getting better. I do think that Cousins is sort of finding his way in this offense. Zach Robinson seems to be pretty adaptable here in the early going. And I don't think we've seen the best of the ground game to this point. I think we'd all agree last week better not have been the best of the ground game, or this team is probably in trouble. So, you know, from an offensive perspective, I know we'll talk more about that, but it feels a lot more sustainable maybe than it has in years past. And then defensively, another thing that I know we're going to get to is the adjustments that this team seems to be able to make on a weekly basis in games bodes well for the future. They're still a little bit short on ability up front in some concerning ways. That's going to come back and bite them at some point, but the defense has felt mostly pretty solid, and that feels sustainable in that very Falcons way, where they'll, you know, bend but won't break. You're not going to have a great pass rush, but maybe they come up with a big play in a big moment because they have guys like Jesse Bates. So I see that all coming together. I see a quality special teams. I see a coaching staff that's still pretty young, figuring this thing out in real time. And it feels to me like we're in a better spot than we were the last couple of Octobers.
Okay. So it sounds like to me, Dave, you believe it's going to be different this time because we haven't quite seen the best version of the Atlanta Falcons at this point in time.
We have not. Yep.
You know, what gives you the confidence that we will see a better version of the Atlanta Falcons moving forward?
Blind optimism, foolish hope, illegal substances, whatever you want to say, man.
Okay. I was curious if you actually had a compelling reason, or it's just like, hey, like it is what it is. This is what we have to believe in it at this point, though. So
yeah, no, it is a little bit of the believing in the talent, right? Like I think Grady Jarrett has been off to a little bit of a slow start. He's certainly still a good player, but I think that he can get better. I think that this defense will get better when Nate Landman's back, when Troy Andersen is healthy, when they play Zach Harrison more. Like there are avenues to me on that side of the ball where you can get better as you go. And obviously some of your tougher opponents, at least on paper, are already out of the way. Offensively, I know they're going to be missing Dalman for a little bit, but I really do look at this as we haven't seen the best of Bijan Robinson or Tyler Algier or this offensive line in general yet. So that gives me some reason for optimism. I just don't think, given how talented this group is, that these are going to be the week-to-week results because, again, of my blind optimism, foolish hope, etc.
Hey, look, we've been here before, and it's like
many times.
It is what it is. So we got to do something here. So yeah, I generally agree with you that I do feel like the arrow is pointing up for this football team. And we'll see if, the offense, the arrow is pointing up for the offense. We'll talk a little bit more about the identity of this football team on the offensive side of the ball here with Dave Choate of the Falcoholic as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. NFL fans, make sure you start your season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Whether you get that hunch in the middle of a Falcons game, knowing that, hey, things are going to end differently than they began, you can go to the same page that you check out their live stats, their live play-by-play, as well as the place that you place your bets. It's all in one place over at FanDuel.com. And when you go there, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And whether you want to place that $5 bet on the upcoming Falcons-Panthers matchup in Week 6, where the Falcons are 6.5-point favorites, or you want to place that $5 bet for whatever you're looking for, Major League Baseball playoffs, NFL football, college football, so much more is available. Just check it out at FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And guys, time is a precious commodity, and sometimes I find myself disappointed with how much I feel like I'm wasting scrolling mindlessly on my phone. And often I think, I could be spending this time more wisely, looking for ways to improve myself. And now I can, thankfully. Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, has an offer of more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses on history, politics, economics, philosophy, chemistry, mathematics. All their courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever you want. And plus, you can go deeper with the readings, the quizzes, the discussions, or just simply sit around and enjoy the lectures. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. So here with Dave Choate of the Falcoholic, and through the first 3 games, it felt like to me, Dave, that the identity of this offense was built around their running game. In the past 2 weeks, it seems to have shifted more towards the pass. Do you think through 5 games, the Falcons have really figured out their identity? And if so, what do you think it is? Or is it still a work in progress as we talk about this team as a whole?
I think it's a work in progress. I think the ideal here really is not that Kirk Cousins has to throw for 500 yards. It'd be nice if he did, but every week for this to work, I think as far as the passing game goes, the rough identity we see today is what they want to do. I think they have their 3 receivers locked in. They're finding in fits and starts a better role for Kyle Pitts. There's probably more they can do with Bijan that they haven't quite figured out yet. But I think in general, that's rounding into form. Again, I have a hard time believing that, the way that they've divvied up carries, snaps, etc., between Bijan and Algier is where they want to be, especially when both of them are not doing well. A good, effective rushing attack is something that they were targeting early on to help the passing game, but they also want to achieve that kind of balance. You do need that. Zach Robinson's coming from a Rams team where Kyron Williams was a huge part of their success. And I think you can make a very good argument that Bijan should be that caliber of player, have that kind of impact on games, even if he's not going to score 20 times or whatever it is. So I do think they're still finding their identity. And I think primarily it is like how important is the ground game going to be for them? How good can that be? How do you work it in a way that makes sense and isn't here comes a run, that's doomed from the start, which was just what we saw over and over again in Tampa Bay.
Okay. Yeah, my takeaway has been I think Algier and Bijan have played very well. I don't think the blocking has consistently been there. I don't know, I don't want to blame the play calling, but it does feel the run game at times, I won't say consistently, but at times feels a little one note in terms of what they do. And I think that lends to it being maybe a little bit more predictable for defenses and easier to stop. And with the passing game, I think you kind of nailed it, where it's like it just feels like you just need to be a more refined version of what they are. But you sort of mentioned Kyle Pitts, and we saw him kind of finally get going last week against the Bucs. Do you feel like that is something that we can reasonably expect every week, or is it going to be kind of a similar ratio as we saw over the first 5 games, which is like maybe once a month we have the big Kyle Pitts game, and then the other 3 weeks it's the receivers carrying us?
Yeah, I think it does depend. I think many have written about it, talked about it. Kyle Pitts is a popular topic, for better or for worse, almost every week. I think if you can get him doing what he's comfortable doing, especially trying to get him vertical where he can win those matchups, I think we should see that kind of production more consistently. I think it's going to be, I think his floor going forward, if this passing attack is really rolling, is like a handful of receptions for 30 yards, which is not very interesting. But if he's a consistent part of the game plan, if he's being impactful, if he is being targeted, that's still a big deal to me, because it wasn't the case necessarily early on in the season. So I do think he's going to have an active role. I do think he's still, the 3rd or 4th guy on the pecking order in any given week. So it's not always going to be consistent production. But I think as they get more comfortable with him and he gets more comfortable in this offense, they'll find a way to consistently get him involved.
Okay. How are you feeling about the start of Kirktober at this point then?
Well, can we do this every week? Is this is this a month-long holiday? I'd be fine with that. It's so funny to me that not only is it a great meme in and of itself, but like not only did he come out and do well to start Kirktober, but he literally set a franchise record like immediately. That's pretty great. I feel good about it.
Okay. So with the run game, I'm curious, is it just simply a couple more weeks of Kaleb McGary sort of bouncing back from his knee injury, Dalman getting back healthy, and then, hey, run game's back? Is it that simple?
I don't want to say it's quite that simple, but it feels like that's a large part of it, right? Like those are 2 of your most impactful guys. I think it makes a massive, massive difference. I think Ryan Newsell's done a good job filling in. I don't want to take that away from him. I think he's one of the success stories of the program, really. But those 2 are just so important that I think they elevate everything you're trying to do. I think to your point, is what they're trying to do maybe a little bit too predictable right now? Yes, I think that can get better. But I think even if you're a little bit predictable, if you have the guys to block those fairly predictable runs well for you, it's probably still going to work fairly well. So I'm fairly optimistic. Yeah, it's 2 to 4 weeks until we get Dalman back. Hopefully McGary stays healthy. I know that's one of the trickier things here, and I think we'll be fine.
Yeah. My worry with McGary is I go back to that 2016 season where Jake Matthews had a knee injury late. I think he suffered against the Chiefs, and he was able to play on it. And it seemed like it was getting better. And then we got to the Super Bowl, and it kind of didn't get better in that game. And my worry with McGary is playing on this knee injury, it's not going to get better. It's kind of just maintaining, and gutting through it. And this early in the season, I do worry a little bit where your most impactful run blocker is not going to be as impactful. So that's my concern, but we'll just sort of have to see how it all develops. He can get back to doing Kaleb McGary stuff as early as next week and we'll be like, okay, all right, I shouldn't have been worried about that. So that is something that to me is worth keeping your eye on, because it's tough, because it's like you kind of need him out there because Storm Norton, while solid as a fill-in, is just not going to bring the same juice. And so like I don't know what the solution is. It's like, well, you want to rest Kaleb McGary, but at the same time, like probably 90% of Kaleb McGary is still probably better than 100% of Storm Norton. So I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think it's dicey, right? Like you do not want to put him in a bad spot. I think the fact that they got him out there for Tampa Bay means they feel like he's in pretty good shape. In a way, the timing is unfortunate because I feel like this might be a good week for him to rest, relatively speaking, because Carolina is so decimated up front. But I think you're going to get hopefully 100% of Kaleb McGary in the not too distant future. But to your point, I don't think that they will go out of their way to say, he's at 90, 95%, a little bit of rest would help him out for the future. I don't think they're going to be in a position where they feel comfortable resting him in favor of Storm Norton or, let's say Brandon Parker, who was briefly mentioned as a Kaleb McGary replacement on Twitter. I love those discussions.
Yeah, this is why I don't get on Twitter anymore, Dave, just because
that's fair.
They're always trying to push, this replace Kaleb McGary island nonsense. And I'm just like, I've made my peace being stuck on this island for the last couple of years. It's fine. It is, Hurricane Crosby's going to come later this month, but, later this season, but it is what it is. We'll just have to cross that bridge when we get to it. I guess Hurricane Parsons is coming a little earlier than that, but hey, we'll see. We'll see how I don't know. It feels bad taste to make jokes about hurricanes during this time of year, given what's going on in the country. So hopefully, everybody out there stay safe, and hopefully, we'll be recovering. So we will move that awkward conversation to something less awkward, which is the Atlanta Falcons defense, which has been playing outstanding football in like the final 4 minutes of the game. And so I'm curious to pick Dave's brain on whether or not like we'll get the final 4 minutes defense in the first 56 minutes at some point later this season. So we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. And guys, I know you want to get back in the stadium to, hang out with your fellow Falcon fans as they make this potential run this year. And, the place that you can go to get back in the stadium is the Game Time app. They're going to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, whether it's for NFL football, college football, baseball, whatever sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you. Game Time is there for you. And we love Game Time here on the Locked On Falcons podcast, because what you see is what you get, right? You can get those panoramic seat views so you can line up the perfect place to be in the stadium, in the arena, in the theater, to get all the action, right? Whether it's Jesse Bates picking off a pass or, someone holding a skull and saying, "Alas, poor Yorick, I knew thee well," or whatever the line is from Shakespeare. So if you want to learn what that line is and correct me, all you got to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So wrapping up here with Dave Choate of the Falcoholic. And basically, Dave, every single week, it seems, last 3 to 4 minutes, Falcons defense is going to be elite. They're going to get a stop that is going to set this team up to win the football game. And, obviously 3 out of the 5 times that's happened, they've been able to achieve that. It's frustrating to me watching this defense basically just kind of be this sort of bend but don't break the unit for 56 minutes every single week, it seems like, maybe give or take 10 minutes or so, and then just completely flip. And it's like, can we get that in the first 4 minutes or the first 40 minutes of the game or something like that? But I'm just curious, where are you at with this defense? Is it right where you want it to be, the quote unquote good enough defense to help this team win games? Do you want a little bit more out of it? Where are you at with the Falcons defense?
I definitely want more out of it. And I think it kind of starts with the run defense, right? Because, again, it's great when all of a sudden, teams can't run at all in the final 4 minutes of the game. But in the meantime, it's 150 yards piled up earlier on. And it's the lack of discipline, the missed tackles, some of the mistakes being made, some of the performances. I know Kentavious Street sort of got banished to the shadow realm based on the first 4 weeks of the season, which was unfortunate because he's a solid defender. But I think there's just been some uncharacteristic performances there. There's obviously the loss of Landman, which was keenly felt, and there's a lot of mistakes. And so to me, that part of the defense is playing well under what I would expect. The pass rush is the other thing. The pass rush, I have a hard time seeing a path to drastic improved play. So I think I'm maybe settling into resignation more than I am like, this is good enough. Like, it's what we're going to get. So I guess it has to be good enough. But I still do think that what they've done in the second half against Tampa Bay, late in other games, suggests that they probably have a little bit more in them than we've seen to this point, in terms of generating pressure. I certainly think, generating zero pressures and a 0% pressure rate in the first half of a game is not something we should expect every week. That's grim, even by our standards. So, but I do think, other than those two things, other than the penalties, we're fairly close to seeing what we're going to get from this Falcons defense. And I think, barring some better consistency and maybe spreading out the strength of the performance a little bit more over the entire piece of bread, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, it's wild to sort of see the tale of two halves with they're getting all the pressure in the second half and they're getting none of the pressure in the first half. And it's like, there's probably like probably, I don't know if it's a happy medium, because probably the medium between those two places is still insufficient pressure, but there is something where it's just like, why are we getting this in a second? Like, can we get this for 4 quarters? I don't know. It's like, for me with the defense, it's like, it's clearly the defense has played well enough for the Falcons to win every single football game that they've been in. But it also feels like, not trying to blame the defense or anything, but it's like, we could be 5-0 right now if the defense just played a little bit better, like 15% better, and it's just like, when you see some of these late game performances or the second half performances, it's like, yeah, that 15% is in there somewhere. And are we going to get more out of it? So yeah, that's why I was kind of wanting to pick your brain. But, talking about, some of the veterans, with, some of those plays in the second half made by Matthew Judon, Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata, Jesse Bates, big time fumble. Are there any sort of young players that you're excited by? I know a lot of people were buzzed about Ruka Roro's performance on Thursday night. JD Bertrand had his moments as well. Troy Andersen obviously had a big game 2 weeks ago. Are there young guys on this Falcons defense that you're eager to see what they can do the rest of the way?
I mean, Andersen is certainly one of them. That it just felt like he hit a switch there after that interception where he looked dialed in a way I don't think I've seen him outside of a handful of plays since he got here. So I want to see, is that just like he had the adrenaline and he was really rolling, and there's still going to be the ups and downs with the roller coaster that is Andersen early in his career, or is this a sign of things to come? So I'm definitely intrigued by that. I think up front, I really would like to see, I know they've increased the playing time for Graham, but Taquan Graham, Zach Harrison, and Rook are 3 guys that I would love to see more of. I think they all have shown that they are capable run defenders for a front that has struggled with the run. I think Rook I would like to see, just so that we can erase the narrative to some degree that this class was a waste of time. It's not producing anything. And I think that the way that Harrison in particular finished the year last year on such a tear, where he was looking really good as a run defender, as a pass rusher, suggests that, the 10 to 12 snaps we've been seeing him per game is a little bit low. And I think maybe more of these young guys up front early in the game on early down situations maybe frees up the older guys for later in the game in critical passing situations where you need the pressure that you know that somebody like Grady Jarrett or David Onyemata can generate. So I'd love to see that rotation change a little bit in the days ahead, and I'd love to see Andersen back.
Okay, all makes sense. Dave, I appreciate you joining me to talk about this Falcons team at a critical juncture in their season. Still several games, coming up that are very winnable games, and we'll see if the Falcons can build upon their first place, spot in the NFC South, or will we be doing the same old Falcons? The minute they take, 2 steps ahead, it's 1 step back and all that sort of stuff. But obviously it made the season much more exciting. We have an awesome Kirktober, coming up, and then, when Kirktober's over, then we get Kirkvember. So it's going to be incredible months. But what are some of the things going on over at the Falcoholic that you want to plug before we duck out of here?
Yeah. So earlier today, I did a little bit of a rah-rah piece. If you want to check it out, it's something to the effect of it's all in front of the Falcons. It feels like there's an opportunity here. This week, of course, we'll be talking Panthers matchup, and shouldn't be a big deal because the Panthers aren't very good, but we've had 2 season derailing losses in the last 2 years with the Panthers. So we do not take that lightly. We'll be looking closely at that matchup. And then just talking a little bit about lineup changes potentially that could be coming with sort of the mini bye week after Thursday Night Football.
Fair enough. I've been telling people, set your expectations low for this Panthers game. I think the Falcons will win it, but it's not going to be probably the big blowout, the big dominant win that I think a lot of people hope and want it to be. So, hopefully, that prediction will be wrong in the sense that the Falcons will have that dominant win. But, it's probably going to be like it's been the last 5 weeks where it's final 4 minutes. You're going to be sweating. Your heart going to have heart palpitations, as someone infamous or famous might say, gird your loins, as someone would say.
You should gird your loins.
Yeah. So we'll see what the Falcons do with this momentum, if it continues into this illustrious Kirktober. As here on Locked On Falcons, appreciate you guys for joining me for this episode. Tomorrow we'll be joined by another Falcoholic contributor, Trayshawn Diaz, making his return to the podcast to talk more about the state of the Falcons at this juncture in the season. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen by subscribing and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And, as your first listen is done, go check out Locked On NFL for your second listen, where you get 2 shows daily. The Madman Tyler Rowland first thing in the morning, giving that shot of NFL espresso, followed by, Tony Wiggins giving that real NFL talk in the barbershop. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.